Back to Thrive at Zen Rocks online gathering. My name is Verena, and I'm very pleased to welcome you here. For those of you who just joined, we are here in Mani, Greece, and we have already had amazing speakers from many perspectives talking about spirituality, activism, and sustainability, how we can go through challenging times together, how we can support each other. And it's been a really amazing conversation so far. And I want to share our Facebook group, which is called Thrive at Zen Rocks Mani. And please feel free to join this group, to comment and share, or you can also join our Instagram, Zen Rocks Mani. And of course, also share this program with others if you appreciate it and if you think that others would benefit from our program. As it's already been said, there's like so many great speakers in this program. So much love and passion and dedication went into bringing this together. And so we're really excited about this program and to share this with you. And I'm also very happy to introduce Cory Muscara, and I had a conversation with him about spiritual bypassing, which is a term that has been formed by psychologist John Welwood. It's a phenomenon where a spiritual practice can actually lead to bypassing and not actually lead to where we want to be, which is integrating our spiritual practice in our daily lives. And so I really love this conversation. I hope you will love it as much. And Cory is also talking about how we can integrate our spiritual practice and how it can become activism in a way and how it can be activism. So yeah, enjoy the session and see you soon. So welcome everyone to Thrive at Zen Rocks Gathering and Online Summit. My name is Verena, and our summit is about how our actions are informed by our inner world and how our spiritual practice or mindfulness practice influence the way we act and relate in our world. And with this summit, we'd like to bring some answers to the questions how the concept of interconnectedness informs our approach to sustainable living and environmental activism. And this is why I would like to talk about a very interesting concept called spiritual bypassing today, which basically means overemphasizing our spiritual practices or spiritual path and not looking at the shadow side or the raw and messiness of our humanness, or not acknowledging what is actually happening in this life, in this world. And so I'm very happy today to welcome Cory Muscara, who is a former monk and co-founder of mindfulness.com. He's the author of the best-selling book, Stop Missing Your Life. And with over 1 million followers across his social media channels, he's known for his very down-to-earth and accessible teachings on mindfulness and mental health. He has taught mindful leadership at Columbia University and is an instructor of positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And for the last 10 years, he has offered mindfulness keynotes and workshops and retreats around the world. And his meditations have been heard for more than 25 million times in over 150 countries. And his goal is to share wisdom teachings in a practical and accessible way. Welcome, Cory.
Thanks, Verena. Hi, everyone. Nice to be with you.
So glad you're here with us. And I learned that you have spent 6 months in a monastery in Burma practicing meditation and other spiritual practices for many hours a day. And this means that you have been very immersed in Eastern tradition, and at the same time you're writing a book, or you've written a book, Stop Missing Your Life, about how to translate these spiritual Eastern teachings into our Western world, right? Into our day-to-day life. And I'm really curious to hear from you if you came across this form of spiritual bypassing, or what your experience is with this.
Yeah, a lot of experience with it. Um, I didn't know it was a thing when I was first starting out in my practices. I got into this work more through the secular lens when I was in college around age 19 and 20, doing basic mindfulness practices, awareness of breath meditation, and um, and was really interested, like most people. The idea of just being present for my life and aware of my thoughts and emotions was this is cool and compelling and mysterious, and I didn't know anything about it, so just kept going deeper. And I was as some people know my story, I didn't start the work for any noble reasons. I was trying to impress a girl. I had a hippie girlfriend in college. She was in a meditation, and that's really the reason I began. But then there was this mix of interest in the practice, and also like really liking the identity of being someone who is a meditator. And those things for about a year motivated my practice. And it wasn't until after I graduated that, yeah, I wanted to go more to the heart of these teachings, and spent time in a Buddhist monastery in Burma, where we were doing very intensive meditation practice, 3 a.m. until around 10 p.m., minimum of 14 hours of meditation per day. And I really didn't know that much about this whole thing. I just knew that there was something about meditation that was helping me. I was getting more calm, more grounded. I was a little less stressed. And I was just really curious what would happen if you did this a lot for long periods of time. And I was in fortunate positions to be able to do it at that point in my life. And so I went there and just had this experience of getting to immerse myself in these practices all day long for months on end, and didn't know that much about personal development at that point. There was just this orientation to something like enlightenment, which in essence was this capacity to be in relationship to your experience without being so activated by it. That would be like a very one-dimensional way to describe enlightenment, but we were anchoring ourselves into an awareness of our experience so that we could watch our thoughts, our emotions, our sensations, different cravings and activations, and essentially be able to be at peace with it, to watch it come and go. And anyone who's meditated before probably knows some version of this. And it was profound. I mean, I left that retreat a completely different person. I still had my personality, but my relationship to my thoughts, my inner critic, my emotions, like it was fundamentally different. But shortly after that, I found myself having to reintegrate into the world in relationships, having to figure out money, and like $100,000 worth of student loans that I needed to pay off. And so all of these real world things were coming into my life, family dynamics, looking for a partner, and just like surviving that. That's where this all came to a head. And I found myself at these interesting intersection points where it was my spirituality and then it was the real world. And I often found that those were in conflict. And yeah, I'm happy to go into a lot of what came up there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I love this quote by Ramdas: if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family.
Yeah. And I can just start there. I mean, one of the first things I noticed when I came back from Burma, I was living at home for a period of time. I would notice in relationship to my family that there were some very serious triggers that were still in me. My dad would say something about like needing to work or make money, and I would kind of just go into this ruminative cycle of like, oh, I hate living at home, I hate my dad. I don't actually hate my dad, but all these like young kind of reactive things. And I would watch that and I would be upset that it was there, because here I just spent 6 months in silence meditating. Like I got to have something to show for all of that time. And I shouldn't be someone who's reacting in this way. And I also really liked being the identity of someone who was at peace, who kind of transcended some of these things. So I would find that I would override these real arisings that were coming up, and patterns and reactivities. And instead of looking at what's the underlying source there, I would try to just push it aside and come back to my breath, and in a way perform the experience of peace rather than actually deeply embodying it. And it ends up, or for me, like ended up leading to lots of passive aggression, or feeling like, oh, I'm close to these people, or like I want to be here with my parents. It's a good opportunity to be able to do this at this time in my life. And at the same time, like subconsciously wanting to create resistance, not resistance, distance. And that's one of the things that spiritual bypassing tends to do, or it's a symptom of it, where like in an experience, we're telling ourselves we're okay with the experience, but another part of us wants out of the experience. And we're trying to override that part in service to play out some idea of how we're supposed to be in a particular situation.
Yeah, right. It's this idea of non-attachment, but then at the same time, we're living in this world and there is attachment to things, and we can't deny it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And on the note of non-attachment, I think the idea of trying to practice non-attachment is just the wrong way to go about whatever that point of wisdom is that people are talking about within Buddhism, of detachment, allowing things to come and go, knowing the experience of impermanence and not being attached to it. It's again one of those endpoint ideals that we see, and then we try to exercise and prematurely layer on to our experience of someone who is not hurt when our partner leaves us, or we don't feel anger because we got fired, or things in our world are extremely troubling and shifting constantly, and it feels fragile and concerning. But it's like, no, I'm not attached. I just let it come and go. That's in most cases not non-attachment. That's just like glorified suppression of your experience. And from someone who's done a lot of that for all of you listening. And my recommendation when it comes to non-attachment is not to try to practice non-attachment, and not to try to even practice letting go, but instead just give yourself more permission to have the experience that you're having, and really pay attention to what the experience of holding on is like, where these things actually shift, where your development of non-attachment actually arises in a healthy way, is not by trying to be unattached. It happens from paying attention to the pain of holding on. And when the mind sees that clearly, it begins to reorganize itself in a way that makes sense for the world that you're in, so that it's not constantly grasping to things that are inherently unpredictable or impermanent. And so, again, another one of those things where we have some ideal, non-attachment, happiness, enlightenment, or even just things like being calm. But instead of going through the process of getting there, the sequence, things in sequence, we just try to like pick ourselves up and plop us at the end point. And a lot gets missed along the way.
Yeah. And so are you saying that it like that we're supposed to be present and focus on the presence rather than focus on an idea, right? And also focus more on the emotions rather than a thought.
Yeah, it's all tricky because it's like a yes and to all of those things. It's not, is it emotions versus thoughts, or some aspect of our experience versus another. It's all part of our human experience. It's all related to our psychological growth. It's related to our emotional growth, and it's related to our spiritual growth. And so the thing that I think is important as you're going through this is the deep honoring, the deep recognition and the honoring that you are in human form, right? Let's just take that kind of trite saying that you're not a human being having a spiritual experience, you're a spiritual being having a human experience. Right? So like, we'll just draw that distinction for a moment, that there's a way that we can find a certain kind of inner freedom in this lifetime that is not so bound by the highs and lows of our psychology, our thoughts, the impermanent nature of our experience. That maybe there's a way to cultivate a certain kind of peace that's sustainable and spacious. Let's just say like that's the spiritual orientation. Well, even then, even if you reach some of the highest levels of that, where you disidentify with your thoughts, you no longer take your thoughts as you, and you recognize like, oh, I'm the seer of my experience. I'm the awareness, not what I'm being aware of. Let's just say you like really anchor into that. You're still going to have to wake up the next morning and go to the bathroom and take a shower and eat. It's not like these things go away as long as you're in human form. And so it in a sense doesn't matter how enlightened you are. You still have to put your pants on in the morning and go outside and get the paper, if anyone gets paper anymore. It's like these things are still part of your life. And if we take the stance that those things go away, or we're trying to make them go away, or they no longer become relevant to our lived experience, we're really denying something significant about this particular incarnation, assuming that maybe there are different incarnations. But like, you don't even have to subscribe to that. All we have right now is that we know we're human beings in a certain plane of reality that has like pain and pleasure. And we also have this ability to be aware of it, and that can take us toward an inner freedom. But if you were given the preference of like, do you want to eat this delicious salad, or do you want to eat these dog feces that I put here, there's still going to be like the desire for the salad. So I say that because if you take that line of logic back to the reality of your experience, often what happens with spiritual bypassing is there is a strong denial of this system and the needs of this system, and some idea that the end point of it transcends this and it's no longer relevant. And really what happens is that there's as Ken Wilber would put it, a transcending and including, where you are giving yourself permission at each level to have an emotion. Let's just say anger. Instead of showing shame for your anger, you move to a place where it's like, oh, I let myself feel it. And I sob at just the grief behind the anger. And I have so much compassion and sympathy for myself, who's been in this world, and how scary it is, and how just difficult it is to be a human. It's like, wow, now, because you gave yourself permission to feel the anger and know it, you really get the heart of it, and a deep compassion for other people who also experience anger, because you understand how it's related to the human condition and what it means to be in this plane of reality, right? And from there, then you might be able to move beyond it in a way that includes it. You recognize it, you love it, you understand it, and you can then start looking at, like, is there a different response in these moments? Maybe then the response moving forward becomes more compassion rather than anger itself. And so it's an example of whatever our practices are, we want to make sure that we're not just orienting to, I have to get to this idealized endpoint, and instead making space and permission for the very thing that's here, and making that the actual work.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And also I feel many people like they turn to a spiritual path because they want to overcome pain or relational wounding. You not, but some people, or many people, I believe. And this is probably why then in the end they still they do very sincere spiritual practice, but still they have the issues, or they are unaware of so many things, right? And they still have problem in their relationship, or they have problems with money and trauma. And so there's not only this one way of you work on this, you look into a direction, right? So, but you also have to kind of grow up in this life.
Yeah, right. And I'm not sure if that's a Ken Wilber reference where,
yeah.
yeah, where he says, there's waking up, which is like the spiritual work. There's growing up, which is like, you could say human development or adult mind development, and then cleaning up, which is like the shadow work, our baggage that gets integrated. And I just want to speak to that point real fast, Verena, because I think it's important. One, to acknowledge that, yeah, most of us, if not all of us, I now put myself in this category, like come to this work for some form of pain and suffering or dissatisfaction with life, and often come to it because of deeper traumas and real significant suffering. And so the idea of having something that can just create a little bit of ease and calmness and inner safety is so compelling. I mean, who would ever argue with that? And if you get glimpses of it, where maybe you sit down and you focus on your breath, or let's just say you do a form of like listening to a nice song, and you realize like, whoa, I can put my attention there and not put it on all of this other stuff that's going on. And I actually feel a little bit of ease because I've learned to direct my attention. You could see how you could become addicted to that is a strong word, but you can then use that as your idea of spiritual practice. And it's good to know that that's a tool, that's a resource, but that as the only tool is a form of avoidance and isn't doing the deeper healing work. And that's where, as you're mentioning, there are so many different paths for how that healing and integration happens.
I wonder, or do you feel like, because there's so many practices that we adapted from like Eastern tradition, and like when we are in monasteries for half a year, or when we are in retreats, and like everything seems to go so well and so easy, and then right when we come back into our life, it all falls apart again. And I wonder if this phenomenon of spiritual bypassing is something that we actually in our Western world experience, but like I wonder if the monks that you met, if they experience that as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Saw a lot. I mean, my first experiences of spiritual bypassing were by highly revered monks and people who spent years meditating and who could sit perfectly still for 3 hours straight. But then, outside of that, if you give them an inquiry into like why they're here or something in their past, the system either like shuts down, freezes, or decompensates and goes into anger. So it's not to diminish the attainments of monastics who devote their lives to these practices, and there are many who are deeply integrated. But if some of those practices are all you've known since you were at the age of 6, and you entered into a monastery and you're just doing particular focus practices or cultivation practices of the heart, and not intentionally bringing space to particular wounds that are there, or just aspect of a different way of relating to the mind-body system, then a lot of this stuff can be overridden. And when it comes to like relationships and relating to another human on the human plane, it requires a certain honoring and anchoring into emotions that are there, rather than just kind of trying to see through the emotion or like penetrate the emotion of anger and understand the nature of reality of it. I mean, try to do that when you're in partnership and you're working something out with your partner of like, where do we live, or what are we going to do about the money? And you're just like primarily focused on penetrating the nature of anger, rather than like letting yourself embody it when it gets activated, and using that as an opportunity to go like, what's underneath this and how do we connect through this? For some people, that it might not be in this life that they're interested in that level of relating. And in that case, like, yeah, you can reach very high levels of peace in monastic settings and caves where you're not engaging with some of the triggers of this reality. But if you are going to be in this reality, there's a lot there that require a different way of relating to experience than I was exposed to through just straight up monastic practice. And all to say just that some of these people that we revere, and for good reason, aren't necessarily holistically mature. Coming from someone, again, who is not holistically mature.
Thank you for your honesty. Yeah, do you think that this is also why there's so many problems often in spiritual communities?
Yeah, definitely. Especially with sexuality. I think this is just an issue with religion in general that kind of just puts sexuality on the side as this thing to be managed, or it's utilized in procreation. And to deny that as like an essential part of our humanness, and also an essential part of our life force, and like intimately connected to our life force, is very problematic. And I think this is why in many spiritual communities, so many of the issues are around boundary violation with sex and sexuality. And so if you just pretend that that's not a thing, or that you've overcome it and you've transcended it, well, it's probably going to come out in distorted and manipulative and problematic ways. So I think any contemplative tradition or spiritual tradition that puts some aspect of your human experience lower than another, and sets up the work as to be like to stand on this in order to get there, ends up creating issues, because now it's like, I need to transcend all of this, and you put yourself in an oppositional relationship to your humanness, aspects of your humanness. You create enemies with aspects of yourself. When you do that, you compartmentalize, you get angry, you end up projecting that anger onto other people when you see them expressing it, and that creates complication. You suppress it entirely, and all of that will just come out in distorted ways, because again, doesn't matter how awake you are, you're still in human form, and that human form is still going to have needs, regardless of whatever spiritual attainment is there. And it will involve interacting with other people, unless you want to live in the forest by yourself. Might be different rules there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm coming from studying tantric traditions, and there, of course, sexuality is also a big issue. And I love that it's actually being very much included in the spiritual practice. But then, of course, there's other problems arising with that, right? Like with teachers and gurus. So we all know about that. But also studying the like spiritual traditions and Buddhism and tantric tradition, I noticed that like it can be seen as an overemphasis of one side of reality, which they would call Shiva, or like the masculine energy, right? And then like not so much looking into the other direction, would be like the manifested reality or Shakti. And so for me, it was a real journey to discover that through Tantra, but also through shamanism, for example, which is also a much more feminine approach, and is really like working with the energy of the earth.
Yeah. It's really cool to hear that, and the different approaches that you're looking at. And it just made me think, as you were talking about how compelled I was in the early stages of my spirituality to have the path and to reach the end point. I mean, before I went to Burma for that first long stint that I did in retreat practice, the orientation was like, I'm going to do my work for 6 months, and then the rest of my life is going to be gravy, because I'm going to be like enlightened, and then things won't activate me or bother me. And, it was a very just young, naive orientation, and precious. And I still think in many ways wise, but it was just not complete. And And one of the things that's really evolved for me in my spirituality over these years has been letting go of this idea of having like the one path and even getting to an end point, and just continuing to stay intimately connected to my moment to moment experience. And through that, seeing like what's arising that needs attention, or where's the curiosity going? And like, oh, there's this interest in playing at the realm of like working with manifesting reality right now, of just like, yeah, cool. There's this ability to be equanimous with all experience. And at the same time, like I find myself wanting to shift my experience, and I find myself curious about that. It's like, cool. And maybe that leads to like 2 or 3 years where you're just like working more on the material level of manifestation, with the understanding that it might not be the thing that leads to complete freedom or awareness. But even if we know it doesn't, but there's a pull to go into that of just like, I want to see what it's like to get to a place where I can make lots of money. And there's just an orientation to that, and you're going to do it in like an ethical way. You might just need to play out that pattern before you become disillusioned by that as a path to true happiness or inner freedom. And I'm not here to say that it will or won't lead to that, but I've had lots of patterns that I needed to give myself permission to go through in order for them to actually complete, and for me to realize, oh, it wasn't that. And then it leads to something else. And so, yeah, it's cool to hear you exploring all these different paths as well, and with like full permission to see like what's here for me at this stage.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about this, like not trying to find the one path, but like keep on looking, keep on being present. What you mentioned in the beginning, right, is like when I'm doing my yoga practice, for example, I'm always wondering, oh, should I be more strict with the asanas, or should I be like more focused on one tradition, when my soul or my body is yearning to just free dance, and then I'm like thinking, oh, maybe this is not good, but I enjoy it so much. And I feel like it's this balance of like really exploring for myself, like what does serve me today, what will serve me tomorrow. It's different, and it's about this like just being present with my experience.
Yeah, exactly, well put. And at another point, or for another person, like they might be in that inquiry, because I think of people listening right now, and I think of myself at different stages on my own spiritual path. And I remember the rigidity early on. I was so captivated by like rigidity, and to use some of the language you mentioned before of like masculine, feminine, which I know can be problematic because it now brings in gender, even though that's not pointing to gender, but like the masculine energy has like a particular rigidity and structure. And I loved that in my practice, like 14 hours a day, wake up at 3 a.m., go to bed at 10 p.m., try to reduce your sleep, and just more and more. And it just was easy for my mind to orient around. And so like I would, at a certain point, hear you talk about yoga and like the rigidity of the asanas and doing them perfect. And I could sense into the part of me at that point that would be like, yeah, no, I want to do that. Like I want to get it perfect. I want to have the right posture. And so someone may be hearing that, and at this point feel like, no, I actually resonate with the opposite of what Verena is saying right now. Like I want that structure. And what I would say is, if there's not an inclination to explore the other, like if you don't feel deep in you what Verena just said of like just kind of letting it go and free dancing or free movement, then trust that you're in sequence with the development of your system, which is not to say that the full evolution of your system is to go into free dance, because maybe Verena will go through that and be like, oh, there's something to the structure again. It's more to say that these things are happening in sequence. And if we get out of sequence and we go like, oh, I want to be there, or I should be there, that's where we bypass an important learning and evolution in our system. And then we ultimately end up having to go back and pick up the pieces or do whatever got missed at that particular juncture before we can proceed with wholeness and integration.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know that you're also teaching positive psychology, and we've talked about it already, that this this bypassing can also be this overemphasis onto the positive, right? To just be like, oh, let's just stay positive. And also I remember this calligraphy of Thich Nhat Hanh, which is just saying smile and breathe. And for me, this also triggered this like, oh, but like just smile and breathe, you know, to anything. And yeah, I wonder, like coming from positive psychology, like what's the approach to this from that perspective, from that lens?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the day you ask me. And like related to the smile and breathe thing, I can feel the part of me that's like, I hate that. And I also feel the part of me that's like, oh, that sounds so nice.
Exactly.
And just different times of my practice where like that simple instruction of just smile and breathe, it was like the highest expression of wisdom. Like, yeah, like just that in this moment. And it just made complete sense. And that was exactly what was needed. And other times where that was like the last thing that was needed, it would be just like the purest form of overriding and bypassing. My pursuit and exploration into positive psychology, which is primarily in academia. So I did my master's in positive psychology with the founder of positive psychology, Marty Seligman. And I've been working at Penn with that master's program for the last 8 years. And my interest in that program initially was actually on the heels of coming out of monastic life and seeing like, oh, there was so much good here. And I found myself actually interested in cultivating other perspectives on well-being and happiness, but like cultivating more positive emotion or like just some form of like, this was amazing. And I want to see what else is there. And there was something compelling about the idea of positive psychology, the scientific study of happiness. And so within that field, I mean, you're going to find so many things from like Angela Duckworth's work on grit, like passion and perseverance toward a long-term goal. You're going to find Barbara Fredrickson's research on the evolutionary foundation of positive emotions, that positive emotions were really designed to help, like you think of something like curiosity or even joy. Let's take joy. Like when you feel joy, you feel more safe in your system. You feel your awareness gets expanded. You feel like, oh, I can do things. I can explore. Like, let me try that out. You're not in this fear-based, insecure place. And so those have an evolutionary foundation to get us like accumulating resources in our environment and trying new things and developing psychological complexity and playing with other, humans to develop the ability to use our bodies to fight if we need to. So like just understanding those things and the role of positive emotions and even like how to potentially cultivate them, I think is hugely valuable. And that's why I continue to stay involved with positive psychology. Like anything, if it is your only tool in the toolbox, or if you take positive psychology in a one-dimensional way and view it as like, I'm just supposed to be happy and no space for the shadow, then yeah, it's going to become problematic. And that's where you'll get the person in the PTA meeting where there's some conflict and they're just like, I think we all just need to be calm and get along and focus on what we're grateful for. One, that person is the most annoying person in the room. And two, that person is livid and they've just suppressed it. So it's when we don't make space for the full range and we don't like descend while we're also transcending, it leads to a lot of passive aggression, a lot of projection, and you will find yourself in a lot of relationship issues.
Yeah, so true. I wonder from the perspective of activism, because there's this issue, right, that we know that like we need to look at ourselves and like find a calm place and act from there. And at the same time, as we learned, we cannot wait until we're enlightened to act. So what is like, how do we deal with this in our life, like to be activists or to bring something out into the world when I feel like, oh, maybe I'm not there yet, but I need to do something, right? This is the moment in time we really need to do something about how things are going in this world.
Yeah. This is it's a very interesting inquiry. And one that brings up like different responses for me. And someone else might have a different perspective on this. The thing I would first lead with is that I think our greatest activism and our greatest offering is the continued intimate connection with ourselves, not in a navel gazing sort of way, not in a deny reality sort of way, or don't take care of other people, or just like go in the closet and meditate sort of way, but in a way of like you are staying as honest with yourself as you can about your own needs, about your own curiosity, about what's pulling you forward at this point. And if you like stay open to the range of your humanness in that way, and really like you do it with sincerity and humility and a deep bow, it will take you on a journey. It will inspire every step of what's to come next and how to be in relationship to the many different world issues that are arising and that are in our immediate in our families, in our immediate communities, in our country, and in the world at large. And so I have a lot of trust for that level of like sincere, deep listening to where am I right now and what feels like the best way I can serve given what's coming up for me. We can layer on mental ideas around like what it means to be involved at a community level and how to participate and how to help. And, books like Effective Altruism, which take more of like a logical approach to, I think, activism and being of service. And then, other books I love, like Pleasure Activism, which is, gives like a really beautiful radical framework for understanding how we take care of ourselves in relationship to serving. But I just have a lot of trust for people like staying really deeply connected to their own experience, because it's not, at times it may take you into isolation where it's like, whoa, I have a lot of like activism to do around my inner child that just like did not have someone standing up for them for decades. And like, this is a period in my life where there's so much going on, but I know if I try to tend to that, I am going to deplete myself. I'm not going to be able to be of service, or I will on some level, but I'm going to lose myself in the process. And so if that person, like through that honest inquiry, like, do we hear the difference between like that versus like, I don't want to deal with that, I'm just kind of going to do my own practices? They might look the same in action. They are worlds apart. They're completely different energetic relationships to activism and to being of service. And so if that person's like, I need to take care of myself, then that's happening, and there's a replenishing that's going on, and it allows you to then be in a fluid energetic exchange with the world around you, and service becomes a natural extension of that, and how the heart responds. And then from there, the resources and the organization of other people and what to do, like that comes from the intention to show up and the willingness, and like I'm ready to get to do something. So that's a high level of how I orient to this. And what I would say is for all of us to continue to be an honest inquiry with ourselves around our practice and being in service, because I think sometimes we can think we're doing what I said, this like very honest inquiry with ourselves, but it's more that we're just comfortable kind of being in our own world. And it's hard. It can be hard to discern the distinctions between like, am I doing this just as a form of protection, or am I doing this because like this is truly what it needs to happen, or am I doing this because I want to avoid something? So if you find that your contemplative or spiritual practice has primarily been for a while more isolated, and maybe just like, oh, I'm going to let those people take care of that, then I do think that's worth looking at and going, okay, like what might that be related to? And what do I feel when I think about getting more involved or sharing my voice or taking a stand on a particular position? And, then you might just come into this whole other realm of your spiritual inquiry, which is like, oh my gosh, I'm so conflict avoidant and I'm terrified of other people judging me or like ruining the peace. And it's like, all right, cool, good. Now we're at least in honest conversation with ourselves, trying to be in relationship to others.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. I know this so well. This like finding myself in like deep meditative practice and then thinking, oh man, am I just bypassing real life, or should I like use this time to, go on the street and protest for something? And like it's really been an intense inquiry, and it still is all the time. And then on the other side, there's like I see so many activists going out into the street and doing this beautiful world and then forgetting about themselves, right? And neglecting themselves and like not being healthy or not being not being enough with themselves to actually be there for the world and for others.
Yep, big time. And there's so much of activism as well that, there's certain needs that can be fulfilled through activism, such as like the community side of it. And so we can end up like having a certain need met around taking a particular position on something that may still be something that's very aligned, but we're getting fed in a certain way without maybe being deeply connected to our like other deep needs of how we want to be in relationship to that form of service. And this, it's always tricky territory when we're navigating our own psychology among other humans and taking a stance on something. And we can feel empowered by taking a stance. We feel connected with others by taking a stance. We can feel validated by taking a stance. And so all of those things I think are worth looking at, of like, what is the motivation and the motivating force here, so that we are deeply of service.
Right, exactly. Beautiful. Coming to the end of our conversation, I would love to know if you have like one practice or some practices that you can recommend as this kind of fully embodied practice.
I think it's so personal for people when as it relates to what is going to be the practice for you at this particular point in your life that speaks to the thing that needs to be touched the most. What I would recommend for a lot of people who have a sitting practice, like maybe came to mindfulness through the secular realm or through Buddhism, and they, focus a lot on stillness, I would explore some movement. I really like intuitive based movement. First, just listening. Where is the body right now? Like, what does it need? Does it want to be curled up underneath the desk, like with a blanket? It's like, cool. What happens if you just let yourself go there and then keep listening and then follow the thread of what unfolds? It's like, I'm here. I spend 5 minutes. I'm just super curled up. It doesn't look like anything like meditation, but it is me listening on the deepest level to this is what feels right now. And then you just let yourself be in that with the deepest permission until it completes. And it will always complete. Something will always, and it'll complete, and then something else will present itself. And then what presents itself might be like, oh, I actually kind of want to open up now and I want to stand, and maybe start shaking or vibrating or making some sound. And so then you give yourself full permission to go into that until that completes and goes into something else. And so it's a way that you could actually take your sitting practice, but bring more aliveness to it and honor the body instead of viewing, right? Because like in straight up Vipassana meditation, you're noticing these urges as they arise. Like, so you're sitting there and it's like, oh, I really want to be curled up. And so you're just paying attention to the experience of wanting to be curled up. And it's powerful to do that. to orient to that in a non-reactive way. You can honor it without reacting to it. So like, we want to make space for that reality. But there's also something powerful to feeling that, and then the permission to go into it. And I think when it comes to being in a body and integrating certain aspects of expression that get lost or overridden in many of our spiritual practices, this simple practice of doing that, of just responding to what's here, full permission to go into it, will bring so much more juice and aliveness and integration to how you orient to your body, how you orient to your mind and emotions, and how you orient to your spirituality. It's been beautiful for me as a practice. You could just view it as like intuitive movement.
Wow, sounds beautiful. Thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So for anyone who wants to find out more about Cory and what he's offering, you can find him on Instagram. And also he has a podcast, which is very alive, and you're sharing a lot of meditations and other practices and also words of wisdom in it. And yeah, I can highly recommend it. Thank you so much, Cory, for being with us. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Verena. Thanks, everyone. Best wishes.